There is a kind of silence that most people never talk about. Not the silence of an empty room. Not the silence of a quiet night. But the silence of a room where someone used to love you, and now cannot bring themselves to walk through the door. That is the silence that nearly swallowed Marcus Hale whole. He was 37 years old. An architect. A builder of beautiful things. A man who had spent his entire adult life constructing structures, plans, a future, with careful, deliberate hands. And then, on an ordinary Tuesday night in October, on a stretch of rain-slicked interstate he had driven 100 times before, a truck crossed the center line. 4 seconds. That is how long the accident lasted. 4 seconds, and the life Marcus had built, the life he had earned with early mornings and late nights and every sacrifice a self-made man makes, shifted on its axis in a way it would never fully shift back. He survived. But his spinal cord did not escape whole. And when Marcus woke in the intensive care unit, tubes in both arms, lights too bright, the sound of machines charting every breath, he did what any man would do in that moment. He tried to move his legs. And felt nothing. Not pain. Not resistance. Silence. The most devastating kind. Now here is what I need you to understand before this story goes any further. This is not simply a story about a man who lost the use of his legs. That is only the beginning. This is a story about what loss reveals. About the people who disappear when the lights go out. And the people who stay. About a woman with a diamond ring who stopped coming. And a woman with a mop and a quiet, unshakable heart, who never missed a single morning. This is a story about who, in the end, treated a broken man like he still had a kingdom worth tending. Stay with me. Because what happens in room 314 of Meridian General Hospital, over the course of 6 months, is the kind of story that does not leave you easily. It finds the places inside you that need finding. And it stays there. To understand what Marcus lost, you first have to understand what he had built. He grew up in East Baltimore. Not the postcard version of Baltimore. The real version. The one with cracked sidewalks and corner stores with iron bars on the windows. And children who learned early that the world was not waiting to hand them anything. His mother worked double shifts at a laundry service for most of his childhood. His father left when Marcus was 9. No explanation. No farewell. Just absence. And Marcus, even at 9 years old, responded to that absence the way he would respond to every hard thing life handed him afterward. He got quiet. He got focused. And he got to work. He won a partial scholarship to study architecture. Covered the rest with loans and 2 part-time jobs. Graduated near the top of his class. By 35, his firm had completed 23 projects across 3 states. Community centers. Medical offices. Affordable housing developments in neighborhoods that hadn't seen real investment in decades. He designed things that mattered. Things that served people who were often made to feel like they didn't deserve to be served. He was, by every honest measure, a man who had built something real. And then there was Vanessa. Vanessa Caldwell was 32 when they met. A marketing director, sharp and polished, the kind of woman who walked into a room and rearranged its attention without trying. They met at a charity gala on a September evening. Marcus, who had never been particularly graceful in social settings, turned too quickly with a glass of red wine in his hand, and caught the sleeve of Vanessa's white dress. He apologized with such genuine, disarming earnestness, that she laughed for nearly 30 seconds straight. They talked until the event staff started stacking chairs around them. They dated for 2 years. And Marcus proposed on a Tuesday. Not a special occasion. Not a vacation or a holiday or a sunset rooftop with a string quartet. Just a Tuesday evening. In the kitchen. With a ring he had been carrying in his jacket pocket for 6 weeks. Waiting for a moment that felt right. And Vanessa, mid-sentence, mid-laugh, stopped when she saw what he was doing. And she said yes. And for 8 months after that. Life was the kind of beautiful that makes a person nervous. Because some part of you always knows, in the quiet hours, that nothing this whole goes untested. The wedding was planned for the following spring. The venue was booked. The invitations were being designed. Vanessa had found a dress. And Marcus, who had spent his whole life building things, was finally building the one thing he had wanted since a 9-year-old boy watched his father walk away without looking back. A home. A permanent one. With someone who chose to stay. He would not get to finish building it. Not the way he imagined. But that is not the end of this story. That is only its beginning. Now, the other person. The one who, in many ways, is the true heart of everything that follows. Her name was Dorothy. Dorothy Elaine Barnes. A hospital housekeeper at Meridian General for 9 years. On paper, that is all she was. A woman in blue scrubs with a cart and a mop and a roster of rooms to clean each day. But paper has never been very good at capturing a person. Dorothy had raised 3 children on her own after her husband, Raymond, passed from a sudden cardiac event 12 years prior. She had survived a house fire that took most of what they owned when her youngest was 7. She had watched her children grow, struggle, and, slowly, imperfectly, find their footing. She had walked through enough hard seasons to have every right to be worn down by them. But she wasn't. There was something in Dorothy, some particular quality that the people who knew her struggled to name precisely. That remained undiminished. A steadiness. A warmth that did not perform itself. A willingness to be present in a room, fully, genuinely present. Without needing the room to notice. One of the younger nurses on the 3rd floor once asked her how she did it. How she came in every single day with that same unhurried grace. Cleaning rooms where people were suffering. And never seemed hollowed out by it. Dorothy had thought about it for a moment. Then she said something the nurse would repeat for years afterward. She said, "Sick people need someone who moves through their space like they still matter. Like their room is worth caring for. Like they are worth caring for. I try to be that person. That's all. That is all." 2 people. One man at the height of everything, and then suddenly, violently, at the bottom. One woman who had spent a lifetime quietly refusing to let the weight of the world make her small. They would not have met in any ordinary version of life. But life, as it so often does, had other plans. The accident happened on a Tuesday evening in October. Marcus was driving home from a late meeting. The interstate was wet from an earlier rain. The lights of oncoming traffic smeared across the road in long orange streaks. He was thinking about a design revision. His mind already back at the drafting table. Already ahead to the morning. Already building something. When a semi-truck drifted across the center line. The driver had been awake for 22 consecutive hours. The impact lasted 4 seconds. Emergency services arrived in 11 minutes. Marcus arrived at the trauma bay at Meridian General 6 minutes after that. He survived. But when the neurosurgeon stood over him 2 days later and explained, carefully, clinically, with the practiced gentleness of someone who delivers devastating information for a living, that the injury to his spinal cord was significant. That sensation and motor function below the mid-chest had been severely compromised. That the road ahead was long and uncertain. Marcus did not cry. He did not argue. He lay very still. And he looked at the ceiling. And somewhere in the quiet of that room, in the space between what he had been and what he now was, something shifted. Not broke. Not shattered. Just shifted. Like a building that has taken damage but has not yet decided whether to stand or fall. Vanessa came, of course. She was there in the first hours after the surgery. She sat beside him through those early days. Holding his hand. Speaking softly. Telling him that everything was going to be all right. And Marcus believed her. Not because the prognosis gave him reason to, but because he had built his faith in the future on the foundation of her. He believed in them the way you believe in the load-bearing walls of a structure you designed yourself. With certainty. With history. With the conviction of someone who has tested the materials and found them sound. That was his first miscalculation. Because in the weeks that followed, quietly, incrementally, without announcement, the visits began to change. Week 1, Vanessa came every day. Week 3, every other day. Week 6, twice a week. Week 8, once. By week 10, she was calling ahead to say she was running late. And then not coming at all. A text message instead. Then, sometimes, not even that. Marcus would watch the door. He would look at the time she had said she'd arrive. And he would watch the door. And the door would not open. There was no fight. No confrontation. No tearful explanation. Just absence. Quiet, steady, accumulating absence. The kind that does not need words because it is already saying everything. By week 14, the diamond ring on his bedside table had gathered a fine layer of dust. He looked at it sometimes. Not with anger. With the particular exhaustion of a man who is beginning to understand something. He does not yet have the strength to say out loud. He was in that room. He was there every day. And the world, his world, was slowly, politely, apologetically moving on without him. The physical therapist came. Marcus sent her away. The occupational therapist came. Marcus sent her away. The chaplain came. Marcus was polite, but distant. He stopped eating most of his meals. He stopped returning calls from his business partner, from his colleagues, from the friends who texted in the first weeks and then, as people do, began to text less. He lay in room 314 of Meridian General Hospital and stared at the ceiling. And wondered, in the long, quiet hours, if this was simply what the rest of his life looked like. A room. A ceiling. A ring gathering dust. A door that no one was coming through. It was a Thursday morning. Gray-skied, unremarkable, the kind of morning that doesn't announce itself. When Dorothy Barnes was reassigned to the third floor. A staff scheduling shift. Nothing more significant than that. She arrived at room 314 the way she arrived at every room. Unhurried, cart first, no announcement. Marcus didn't look up. He had learned, by then, to be invisible to the people who came to clean. And they had learned to be invisible to him. It was one of those unspoken social contracts that form in hospital rooms. The patient stays in his world, the housekeeper stays in hers. They orbit each other without intersecting. And everyone gets through the morning. But Dorothy had not received that contract. Or perhaps she had, and simply chose not to sign it. Because she looked at the untouched breakfast tray. She looked at the man staring at the ceiling. She looked at the room, its flat, defeated energy. The way a person who has spent years reading rooms can read one in a single glance. And then she simply spoke. She did not offer sympathy. She did not ask how he was feeling. She did not tiptoe around him the way so many people had. Treating him like a wound they were afraid to touch. She simply observed, out loud, without ceremony, that the oatmeal on his tray had been sitting long enough to qualify as an architectural feature. And Marcus, for the first time in weeks, felt something shift in his chest. Not joy. Not yet. But something adjacent to it. The faint, unexpected stir of being seen by someone who was not afraid of what they were looking at. Dorothy cleaned the room the way she always did, thoroughly, without rushing. And while she cleaned, she talked. Not at him. Not about him. Just talked. About the rain that had finally stopped overnight. About the coffee in the break room, which she described as the kind of beverage that made you question your choices. About a cardinal that had appeared on the windowsill of a room down the hall 3 mornings in a row. She talked about ordinary things. And in doing so, she did something that no one in that hospital had managed to do in weeks. She made the ordinary sound worth returning to. She came back the next morning. And the morning after that. Each time, the same presence. The same refusal to treat his room as a tragedy to be managed. Marcus began to notice the sound of her cart in the hallway. Not because she was fixing anything. Not because she was offering solutions or insight or recovery plans. But because she was the one person who came into that room and acted as though his days still had texture. As though morning was still worth acknowledging. As though he was still a man who existed in the present tense. Rather than someone the world was speaking about in the past. It happened gradually. The way most meaningful things happen. Without a single identifiable moment where the tide turned. One morning, Marcus asked her a question about the cardinal. The next morning, he had finished his breakfast before she arrived. The morning after that, he had his laptop open. Small things. Unremarkable to the outside eye. But anyone who has watched a person return to themselves from a very dark place knows that the small things are never small. They are everything. They are the whole road back. Dorothy never took credit. She never remarked on the changes. She simply showed up. Day after day after day. And brought the ordinary world into that room with her like a window she kept opening. And Marcus, slowly, stubbornly, achingly, began to breathe again. He started sketching. First the window frame. Then the shadows on the wall. Then, blueprints. The community health clinic he had been commissioned to design before the accident. He started returning calls. To his business partner first. Then to colleagues. Then to friends who had drifted but not entirely disappeared. He started attending physical therapy. Showing up, for the first time in weeks, with something that was not quite hope yet. But was pointed in its direction. And slowly. The room that had felt like a conclusion. Began to feel like something else. Something that did not yet have a name. But was unmistakably alive. If this story has found something in you, if Marcus's room feels familiar in any way, drop a comment right now. Just say, I'm still here. Because what's coming next is the part this whole story has been building toward. And I promise you, it is worth the wait. 5 months into Marcus's hospital stay. The room looked different. There was a blueprint pinned to the corkboard beside his bed. Detailed, deliberate, alive with the kind of precision that only comes from someone who cares deeply about the work. There was a half-drunk coffee on the bedside table, still warm. There was a small succulent plant on the windowsill. Brought in by one of his colleagues during a visit. Sitting in the same spot where the diamond ring had once gathered dust. The ring was gone. Put away in a drawer. Not forgotten. But no longer on display. Marcus was, by every visible measure, a man finding his way back to himself. And then came the Thursday that changed everything. Dorothy arrived at room 314 for her morning shift. And found the room already occupied. Vanessa was there. The first visit in nearly 2 months. She stood near the window. Dressed carefully. Her posture precise. The posture of someone who has rehearsed what they are going to say. Dorothy paused in the doorway. She began to back away. Sensing, as she always did, when a room belonged to something private. But Marcus looked at her. And he said, clearly, without hesitation, that she should stay. What followed was not a scene from a movie. It was not dramatic in the theatrical sense. It was simply the truth. Spoken by a woman who had finally gathered enough honesty to deliver it cleanly. Vanessa said that she still cared for Marcus. She said that the accident was not his fault. She said that she had spent months trying to find a version of herself who was capable of this life. The one that now stretched before both of them. And she had come to understand, painfully, that she was not that person. She said she was sorry. She said it more than once. And then she placed a ring on the bedside table. Her engagement ring, the one Marcus had given her. Next to the one that had been in the drawer. And she walked out of the room. And the room was very quiet. Dorothy did not leave. She did not speak. She moved her cart quietly to the corner. She pulled a chair beside Marcus's bed. And she sat. She sat the way she always did. Fully, without performing it. Present in a way that cost her nothing to give. And meant everything to receive. They stayed like that for a long time. And then Marcus spoke. He said that he had known. Not consciously, not in words. But somewhere beneath the hope he had been holding on to. Somewhere in the place where a person knows things they are not ready to say. He had known for a long time. He said that her absence had already been telling him the truth. Long before she found the words to speak it. And Dorothy, who had no degrees in psychology, no training in grief counseling, no credentials to hang on any wall, said something that Marcus would carry for the rest of his life. She said that some people show us who they are not with their words, but with their feet. That where a person walks toward, and where they walk away from, that is the truth of them. The rest, she said, is just talking. And Marcus was quiet. But something in his face. Something that had been tightly wounded for months. Released. Not all at once. But enough. 2 weeks after Vanessa's visit. 2 weeks after the room had held that particular silence. Marcus's physical therapist and his attending physician requested a meeting. They had reviewed a new set of imaging results. Follow-up scans that painted a different picture than the original assessment. The injury, they explained, had not been as complete as they initially believed. There were indicators. Small, fragile, not to be overstated. Of nerve regeneration in the affected region. It was not a guarantee. It was not a proclamation of full recovery. But it was a door, slightly, tentatively ajar. Where before there had been nothing but wall. With intensive, committed rehabilitation. With time and discipline and everything a man who had rebuilt himself once already knew how to give. There was a real possibility of regained mobility. Partial, perhaps. Or possibly more significant. Walking, the therapist said carefully. Assisted, slow. Was within the range of what the evidence now suggested was possible. Marcus sat with that information for a long time after they left. And then he did something the nurses on the 3rd floor would talk about for years. He laughed. A real laugh. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and unguarded. The kind that belongs to people who have just been handed back something they had quietly stopped expecting to receive. And the next morning, when Dorothy arrived with her cart, Marcus told her everything. And then he said something else. He said that she had come into that room when he had already decided the story was finished. He said that she had talked about cardinals and terrible coffee and ordinary things. And that somewhere inside all of that ordinary, he had found his way back. He said that he had never properly thanked her. And Dorothy set down what she was holding. And she looked at him the way she looked at everything. Directly, warmly, without pretense. And she said, showing up is always the whole thing. People forget that. The showing up is everything. Marcus Hale was discharged from Meridian General Hospital. 8 months after the accident. He moved into a modified apartment. He returned to his firm, part-time at first, then full. He completed the community health clinic design from his wheelchair. And it won a regional architecture award the following spring. 14 months after the accident. He took 11 steps with a walker. In the rehabilitation center on the second floor of the same hospital where his story had nearly ended. His physical therapist, Dr. Renee Okafor, described what she saw in that moment as something she would carry with her for the rest of her career. Not the steps themselves, though those were extraordinary, but the expression on Marcus's face as he took them. The look of a man who understood, with his entire body, what it had cost to get there, what had been surrendered, what had been found, what had been, against the weight of every dark morning, rebuilt. He went on. He designed a pediatric wing for a children's hospital. He mentored young architects from neighborhoods like the one he grew up in. He started a foundation that provided architectural services to underserved communities at no charge. He built things that lasted. He kept building. And Vanessa. Because this story has room enough to be fair. Vanessa was not a villain. It is important to say that clearly. She was a woman who knew her own limits. And named them honestly. Rather than slowly dismantling Marcus with a version of presence that was really just prolonged departure. That kind of honesty takes courage. A different kind than Dorothy's. But courage, nonetheless. Not every person who leaves is your enemy. Some are simply not the person for the particular chapter you are living. And understanding that, without bitterness, without the poison of resentment, is its own kind of wisdom. Its own kind of freedom. Marcus understood that eventually. And it cost him something to get there. But he got there. Now, 18 months after the accident. On a bright October morning that bore a certain ironic resemblance to the one that had changed everything. A new community health clinic opened in East Baltimore. Marcus's name was on a bronze plaque near the entrance. There were dignitaries. There was a mayor and a city councilwoman and a press photographer and a small crowd of community members. And in the front row, not by accident, not by coincidence, but by specific and deliberate invitation, sat a 62-year-old woman in a yellow dress. Dorothy Elaine Barnes. After the ribbon was cut. After the speeches were given and the applause settled. Marcus wheeled to the front row. To the front row. And in front of every camera and official and assembled guest. He took Dorothy's hand in both of his. And he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, that the building they were standing in front of existed. Because a woman had showed up for him when he had stopped showing up for himself. That she had never carried a title. Never asked for recognition. Never required an audience for her kindness. That she had simply arrived. Every morning. With a cart and a steady heart. And the absolute refusal to treat a suffering man as though his life no longer mattered. He said he wanted the world to know her name. And the room, full of people who had come to celebrate a building, found itself, instead, celebrating something far harder to construct. The particular, irreplaceable grace of a person who shows up when everyone else has decided it is acceptable to leave. Dorothy pressed one hand over her heart. She did not say much. She never did. But later, after the photographs and the handshakes and the yellow punch that tasted vaguely of artificial lemon, she found Marcus alone by the entrance of the building. And she said that she was proud of him. Not for the building. Not for the award. For the 11 steps. For the morning he finished his breakfast before she arrived. For every quiet, unremarkable, essential moment of choosing. Choosing to come back. Choosing to still be here. That had led to this one. Marcus said he could not have done it without her. And Dorothy, true to herself to the very end, said that was not quite right. She said she had not done anything he had not already had inside him. She said all she did was hold the room steady while he found his way back to it. That's all any of us can do for each other, she said. Hold the room. Keep showing up. That's the whole of it. And here, before we close, is the lesson I want you to hold. We live in a world that teaches us to measure worth in visible things. In titles, in income, in what a person is able to offer us. Practically, socially, materially. We are very good, as a culture, at seeing the people who arrive with credentials. And very poor at seeing the ones who arrive with mops. But this story asks us to look again. Because the most powerful person in Marcus Hale's story did not have a title, did not have a strategy, did not come with a plan for his recovery or a roadmap for his grief. She came with a cart, and a presence, and the absolute, unshakable conviction that the man in that room was still worth showing up for. That is royalty, not the kind that is inherited. Not the kind that is purchased. The kind that is chosen, every single morning, by people the world walks past without looking. And if you have someone like that in your life, someone who has held the room steady while you found your way back, you already know what I mean. You felt it when I said it. Because that kind of person leaves a mark. Not on a building. On the inside of you. Where it lasts. Marcus Hale lost his legs for a season. He lost a woman he thought was his forever. He lost the version of himself he had been constructing since a 9-year-old boy decided that absence was something you build against rather than surrender to. But in a plain gray hospital room. In the quiet, unhurried company of a woman with a mop and a heart larger than any structure he had ever drawn. He found something. Something harder to build than anything in his portfolio. He found himself. And the lesson. The one that this story has been carrying all along. Is this. Not every loss is the end. Some losses are the excavation. The clearing of the ground. The painful, necessary removal of everything that was built on the wrong foundation. So that what comes next can be built to last. And the people who stand with you in that clearing. The ones who show up when the ground is bare and the future is uncertain and there is nothing comfortable or easy about staying. Those are the people worth knowing. Those are the people worth becoming. Subscribe to this channel for more stories like this one. Stories that do not simply entertain, but remind you of who you are, and who you still have the chance to become.